Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. This episode is called Ted, Fred, and Ned, the Pitfalls of Storytelling. And it's all about the stories that we tell ourselves, that we tell each other, and how sometimes we're getting the story wrong. And storytelling we're kind of wired for stories, right? It's for a very long time, it's how we pass information down from generation to generation. And it's a way that we make sense of ourselves, the world, other people. But there are definitely some pitfalls, and a lot of the time, the stories that we're telling ourselves about, what has happened are ways that we are perceiving and storing information about what has happened, why we are the way we are, why other people are the way they are, why the situation is the way it is. And sometimes the stories that we're telling ourselves are old. They made sense at one time, but they're really not so relevant anymore. Maybe we've shifted things a little bit in our thinking so that we can kind of live with what happened. And you'll find that a lot of the time, if you explore your own stories about things that have happened in your life, particularly like painful ones, you might be making yourself the victim or the hero. It's just good to look at, how am I casting myself? If I'm always the victim in every story that or the hero, there's probably something there for me to look at, and just consider. Sometimes everyone does this. This is not like, everyone out there is telling themselves stories about something. Sometimes we're telling ourselves stories about ourselves, like, no one likes me, or everyone else gets the breaks. You might have all kinds of ways that you are moving through the world with stories in your head that aren't really serving you, and they might be so ingrained you don't even think about them anymore. So some of the examples I was using just to illustrate the point, years ago, like after I had opened the local studio, the brick and mortar studio in downtown Santa Monica, which I closed in 2018, moved fully online, but about, I want to say, we opened in 2009, so it was around 2011, one of my regular students approached me and she said, I curate TEDx talks and we are doing a whole series on the topic of hope, and I would really love for you to come and do a talk. I know you would hit it out of the park. And I was instantly intrigued and terrified, probably in like equal parts, because I have a very huge fear of speaking in public, which might seem very strange to people who have practiced yoga with me for years and years, or who came to any of like the book events that I did when the last book came out in 2016. I did a reading at Barnes & Noble. I think every single person I'd ever known in my entire life was there, including like high school teachers and people I did not expect to see, and I'm completely fine in a room. It doesn't matter how many people are there. I've taught at festivals. I could have 5,000 people doing yoga, and it's absolutely fine. But if you put those same people in chairs facing me, just like staring at me, it's no longer fine. It's like I would love for the world to open and swallow me whole. And so when I was approached about this, it elicited a lot of fear and conflict because I wanted to say yes, but I was also really scared to say yes. And my student had absolutely no, in her mind, this would be easy for me. Just come on in. You're going to talk to a room full of people about hope. It's a no-brainer. So that was her story about me based on what she had seen in the room with me in a yoga class for years, and that is something that we're doing a lot. We extrapolate. We see one thing and we make all kinds of assumptions about what it means. And she had no way of knowing that it would be different for me if people were sitting in folding chairs staring, wouldn't necessarily occur to somebody that there would be a difference, but there was a huge difference. So that was like the first story I was talking about was hers. But in that case, I really wanted to be the person that she thought I was. I wanted to be, in that way at least, the person that she thought I was. Like I could just stand up in front of a room full of people and openly talk about things that I feel are important or that matter. And so I had a therapist at the time. I was very new into my divorce. I had tiny kids, and my divorce happened, obviously was, incredibly heartbreaking. It was not what I had wanted. I don't think anyone goes into marriage, wanting to have it end in divorce. And I had 2 tiny kids. My son was 4 and my daughter was 1.5 at the time. And so I knew as my first marriage was ending that I was going to need some support, because it so happened like my son was 4 when that occurred. I was 4 when my parents got divorced. I just knew that it was going to bring a lot of stuff to the surface, and I wanted to have an objective person there kind of in the mix with me, just to make sure I was really showing up as the best mom I could be and the best person I could be, and just all of that. And I was also in business with my ex-husband, so that had its own set of challenges. So I found a therapist who was brilliant, and I went to talk to her, and I was telling her about this TEDx talk and like how I really wanted to do it, but I was terrified. And she said, "Oh, I know what you need. You just need propranolol." And of course I said, what is that? And she said it's a medication that basically you will not feel any nerves at all. You'll just be yourself, but you won't have the racing heart or the shaking hands, the shaking voice. You won't have any of the symptoms of fear, and you'll just be able to, speak. And it turned out that she had taken this medication because she and her husband trained therapists around the world. She's brilliant. And they would sometimes have like thousands of trainees at these events, sometimes in Europe. She would travel everywhere and lead these 3-4 day training retreats for therapists. And so she said that in the beginning, when they started doing this, there was so much anxiety flooding through her system. It was terrifying. And her doctor gave her this prescription, and it literally like stopped the problem dead in its tracks. And she was just able to get up on a stage, with a microphone and speak freely to, a couple thousand people with no problem. Sound like a miracle to me. I was like, tell me more. And does it ever not work? And are there side effects? And and I'm not in any way, obviously, I'm just sharing my experience. I'm not trying to but it was news to me. And I then said to her, okay, I can definitely call my doctor and, find out if I can get a prescription. But I do feel kind of like a fraud, because I am teaching people breathing techniques, meditation techniques, teaching them yoga, all these different tools to kind of calm the nervous system and quiet the mind and, find ease. And like, if I'm going to take a medication to give a public talk, like, doesn't that make me a fraud? And she said, well, I don't know. I mean, my job is to help people manage their fears and understand themselves. Am I a fraud? Because and so it really gave me, and she was the furthest thing from a fraud. She's just really, really incredibly brilliant. And so it gave me pause, and it really helped me kind of look at the story I was telling myself, which was, if I need any kind of help in any arena ever, then I'm a fraud, That's not like realistic. And so the rest of the session, we talked about that sort of what that was all about. Like, what are these tendencies that I have to be so exacting and so demanding of myself that I think I should never need any kind of support? And is that realistic? And how many arenas in my life am I doing that? And, yeah, there's a lot of stuff to dig into there. My own story about myself and what I quote unquote should be able to handle or face without any help. And that's ongoing work, by the way. Like, that is a tendency, and that's something I know about myself, that this is something I tend to do. Even I think it was about a month ago, I had to have an MRI where you go all the way into the tube. And after my mother died in 2021, I developed really intense claustrophobia. I mean, really intense. And I found this out because I'd had an MRI back in 2021, a couple of months after she passed, and they had to pull me out of the machine. I never had claustrophobia before in my life, and just, I think there's something for me, because I spent that last month of my mother's life in the ICU with her. I think I do have some PTSD around being in a hospital setting, just being in that environment. And yeah, I mean, but in that instance, in 2021, when they had to pull me out of the machine, I was able to calm myself down. They'd already given me the dye. I was there. I didn't want to have to like reschedule and come back. And I was able to breathe through it, meditate through it, get myself through the procedure. But about a month ago, I had to go back, and because I'd had that experience of going into and I knew what it was, I think I just had all this like fear of, what if this happens again? And now I know what I'm in for. And the doctor said, let me give you a couple of Xanax for the day, and you can take that, and then you'll go and you'll be, you'll be in and out, And I was struggling with giving myself permission to take the Xanax, because I was doing that same thing to myself again. Well, I should be able to calm myself down. This is what I've been doing for 30 years. And the truth is, I'm sure I could have. I'm sure I could have gone and turned that into a test, right? I'm already dealing with, and I'm totally fine, by the way, but I was dealing with a health concern. So I'm already dealing with that. And do I really need to prove something to myself? Do I really need to put myself through that extra test of like, yes, this is already, scary. You're already in this environment. You're already dealing with some PTSD, and I'm not going to allow myself to take a medication that would just make this whole thing a lot easier to handle. Like, why would I deny myself that? Who am I trying to prove anything to, And so I did take it, and I did have the MRI, and I am totally fine. But this is my ongoing work, is this sort of demanding, you don't get to have help because, you should be able to face anything at any time and just use the tools that you have. Yeah, okay. I mean, if you want to do things that way, but we all need support sometimes. And if you're given the option of putting yourself through something that could be stressful or, highly stressful, why would you not avail yourself of some help? Like, what is that? So, So there's that. Those are the stories that I always have to be watching. Then there are stories that we're telling ourselves about other people. So the student, had the story that this would be really easy for me, and I had the story that I shouldn't need any help. And then I did the talk. I took the propranolol. I did not know if it was going to work or not. You can't replicate. You can't like sort of test it, because you would have to test it in a room full of people sitting in chairs staring at you while you're being filmed, right? Like there's no way to kind of give it a test run. So I just had to go on faith that first time that I would get to this event space and it would all be okay, but I didn't know for sure. So I had a lot of, fear and anxiety running through my system leading up to this talk. And there's all these other things too, right? It is being filmed. You have 18 minutes. So there was the content. I just was like really trying to make sure I was prepared. And so I did all of that. And then I took the medication and I got there and I got up and it worked for me like a charm. I was able to be relaxed, be myself. I wasn't foggy at all. It just worked really, really well for me. And in fact, I used it again when I went on the book tour, because that whole experience again of just having people sitting in a room staring at me, if they're in down dog and they're busy and I'm getting people to focus on themselves and their own breath and their nervous system and quieting their minds and what's happening in their own body, it's no problem. They're in down dog, or they're in warrior, or they're doing whatever they're doing. They're not, but when it's just me standing up there talking, it does feel like, as I said in the essay this week, somebody asking me to go to the grocery store naked whilst singing loudly as if it's no big deal, and also we're going to film you and live stream it. So, that according to so many people who do use propranolol for these public speaking events, after a while you don't need it anymore, because you just get over it. You realize I'm not going to die. I'm going to get up and I'm going to talk and I'm going to be myself and it's going to be fine and I'm not going to die. And so then after a while, you're just so comfortable up there that you don't need it anymore. That's what happened to my therapist at the time, and a lot of people I know who've used this medication, eventually they just get over it. I haven't done enough regular public speaking to be at the place where I'm like over it, but I'm a lot more comfortable than I used to be. It even used to affect me going live. It's on like social media platforms. So it's one of the reasons that I have created smaller groups where I was going live on some of these platforms. The Facebook page that developed when I started blogging back in 2010 has 175,000 people on it, and the thought of going live there for a long time was really terrifying. It's just it's a thing. It's not rational, but I'm getting over that, and I'm not needing to take anything to get over it. I'm just going live. So these things are like, everybody's got their stuff, their fears, their concerns, their traumas, and we're all human. We're all human. So that, but you might have a story that you tell yourself about what you should be able to do or face without support or help. And that's something to certainly look at. The third story I was talking about was about a few months after the TEDx talk, my mom she encouraged me to get on the dating apps. And it had been 1.5 years since the divorce. I had really been just like focused on the kids. They were so little. I was still nursing my daughter. There was no way I was interested in even trying. But I thought, all right, she's like, you're not going to meet you're with the kids or you're teaching. That's it. Like, that's all there is no opportunity for you to meet anyone. And, no one's going to just like show up in your living room. So I went on the apps and I, connected with this guy, and he at least seemed sane. And I met him for coffee, and he was incredibly awkward. It was just and so I spent the whole time kind of like taking care, like he was nervous, and I could see that he was like very uncomfortable. And so I went into kind of like that mode, teacher mode, whatever, just like, okay, I'm going to help this person be at ease. And it was exhausting. It's like, I'm already exhausted. I'm a single mom. I'm working my butt off. And now I'm like, I've met someone and they're not okay. And so I'm like having to, go into that mode. I mean, I don't have to do that, but that's what I did do. And so at the end of, short coffee walk, I went home. He texted me and he said, I think that I really blew that. I really like you. I Googled you and I watched the TEDx talk you gave, and my job is that I sell car mats, the mats that go in the bottom of cars. And they're manufactured in China, and I knew from your talk you wouldn't be okay with that. So he had a story, right? He had a story coming into this date, never met me before, never had a conversation with me, that I wouldn't like him because of his job. Now, it was not a match. But it was not a match because of car mats. It was just not a match. It probably didn't help that he showed up with this giant story in his head, because it affected the way that he behaved and the way that he carried himself and every aspect of everything. But even if that hadn't happened, it still wasn't a match. But the bottom line is that these stories that we're telling ourselves, they affect the way that we are moving through the world, and they affect all the ways that we're interacting with people. And so I did say to him, it's not a match for me, but I just want to mention, like, it's probably not a great policy to decide things for people before you've even met them. Like, maybe just try to not do that is a thought. But I had fallen prey to that myself. And when this event happened, and I called this guy Fred, but the truth is I can't remember his actual name. It just worked really well for the title. So I went with it. But I had the same experience with a guy named Ned, and that is his actual name. And Ned is someone who, when I first moved to Los Angeles in 2001, I took over the class of a very popular yoga teacher at Crunch in West Hollywood. West Hollywood boasts a beautiful, vibrant gay community, and the class was filled with mostly gay men. It was just packed. It was like, 100 people in there. And they had really loved the last guy, who, by all accounts, was extremely adorable and, taught a great class. So they were not happy to see me. And when I walked in that first night, they actually groaned. Like, it was a palpable, we are not happy about this at all. So I knew that I was really going to have to show up with my A game and, and hit it out of the park if I had any hope of really taking this class over. And I did. I did it. I got in there and I just was determined, and I did it. I made them laugh. I made them sweat. I made them focus. I made jokes about things. The room at Crunch at the time, I don't know if it's different now, but when I was at this time, there was a mirror across the front wall of the studio, which is never my favorite thing in a yoga studio. But they use that class for a million different fitness classes. So mirrors are pretty typical in a gym environment. And then the studio itself had glass walls. So it was like a fishbowl with a mirror at the front. And outside the studio were a bunch of weight machines. So you basically have people in down dog and people around the outside of the studio looking in, lifting weights, and the people in down dog are looking out. I mean, it's like teaching in a nightclub. And then they pump in music. It's like boom chicka boom chicka boom chicka, so it's it was chaos. It was a circus, and it was also some of the most fun I've ever had. It was just so insane to try to get people to focus that I loved the challenge. It was great training for me as a teacher and as just a person, it was really good training. So I had won over. I felt within like a couple of weeks, okay, I've won them over. Like they're with me. They're definitely like happy to see me when I walk in. A few people had invited me out for drinks after class and I didn't know anyone in LA. So that was like really great. And I felt like, the manager's feedback's awesome. They love you. So it was all going well, except for this one guy who stood front and center in the room. And so there's the mirror, and he's literally in the front row, right in the center, every class. And he would show up right as class was starting, and he would take off right when class left. And every time I would crack a joke or just say anything even remotely philosophical that would sort of try to connect like what's happening on your mat with what might be happening in your life. Like, if there's a pose, for example, that's really challenging, you get to figure out what happens to you when you're dealing with a challenge, when you're dealing with some confrontation. Do you get really frustrated? Are you really hard on yourself? Do you open to the experience? Like, what happens for you during confrontation? Figure it out on your map, because chances are it's like, probably the same way that you're facing confrontation in your life. Anytime I would say anything like that, he would audibly like sigh, scoff, roll his eyes, sometimes he would like make a sound, but it was very clear to me that he felt tremendous disdain, contempt. Like nobody was missing it. And because there's the mirror, like the whole class were like watching this go down. And a few people said something to me, so it was not just me having this impression that this guy can't stand me. It was kind of a palpable feeling in the room, but I was getting through it. The struggles I was having with it, I was able to kind of like deal with internally. I did my best to just keep teaching my class. I would try to remind myself like, okay, there's 100 people in the room. If one of them doesn't like you, that's not the one to focus on. Focus on the 99 people that are, here and happy and laughing and sweating, and, don't let yourself get sidetracked here. But I had to do that work. That's how sort of intense the experience was. And I thought about it after class, like, what is going on with this person? Like, what is it? Like, why does he keep coming? If he dislikes me so much, like, why does he keep showing up? And so then I'm thinking, well, it must be, the only explanation I can come up with here is that he has this membership. This is the only time slot in the day that works for his schedule. He likes the workout aspect of what I'm doing. He likes the sweat. He just can't stand me as a person, or he doesn't like my sense of humor, or he hates the sound of my voice. Like, it's, something like that. And he's not going to like not come to class just because I'm there. He's going to suffer through the parts of me he can't stand just to get the workout. I'm laughing because I was just so wrong, but this is what I'm telling myself. So a few months went by and I really did want to talk to him, but I never had an opportunity to do that until one night. A few months in, usually I would have people wait after class to say hi, to talk, to, hug. Sweaty hugs, big in yoga. And so one night he was waiting, and I was very aware that he was waiting. And there was like 3 or 4 people saying goodbye to me, laughing, talking, whatever. And so probably took a good 10 minutes. And finally it was just the two of us. And he introduced himself, told me his name was Ned, and asked me if there was any chance that we could talk somewhere outside of the gym, at another time. And he seemed distraught and sincere, and I thought it would be good for us to talk. It would really be good for us to connect and for me to try to figure out what's happening here and all of that. So I told him that I went hiking with my dog every Saturday at 11 at Runyon Canyon, and he could meet us at the trailhead if he wanted to. And that felt totally fine to me, because I did not feel like I didn't feel unsafe in any way. I didn't feel like he was going to push me off a cliff, or, plus I had my dog who was 150 pounds and would not have let anything happen to me. But I really wasn't worried. I would never have made a plan with someone if I was actually really worried about my physical safety. So we met at the trailhead. He was there before we were. He had treats for my dog. We start hiking, and he's very openly talking to me about deeply personal things. And so I'm like, well, I don't know what we're like, I don't know why we're doing this. I don't know what's happening. And now he's just like confiding in me. And so I'm in that conversation with him, and I'm, of course, trying to respond with like compassion and care, because I always care. If someone starts talking to me about things that they're struggling with in their lives, like, I care. But about 30 minutes in, after we had been, talking about really intense things for a while, I said, I just have got to ask you, what is happening right now? And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'm so like honored and touched that you are talking to me, and I want you to feel absolutely comfortable, and I'm here for it, but you hate me. So like, I'm just so confused right now. And he's like, I hate you? What are you talking about? I'm like, well, I don't know. You take my class and you like roll your eyes when I say things, and you sigh loudly, and you shoot me dirty looks. And he was like, oh, I am rolling my eyes at myself. Like, you say things sometimes, you just kind of like throw this stuff out there in this kind of offhand way, and it just hits me like in my gut, or I'm like, oh, I'm doing that thing, or that's me, and he's like, a lot of the time I feel like you're talking specifically to me. That's who I'm rolling my eyes at. So I'm like at Runyon Canyon with Ned and my dog, just realizing like, wow, I really, really had this wrong. Like, I had this completely wrong. I don't think I could have had it more wrong than I did. And I had spent so much time and energy dwelling on a story that just wasn't true. And it's not that it didn't have, like, all indicators would have suggested, I think, to any reasonable person, that what I thought was right, because it seemed that way. But just because something seems a certain way doesn't mean it is a certain way. And that was a huge lesson for me. And just, if you want to understand what's happening with someone, you really have to ask. And it's not just the asking, you then have to really listen, like active listening, right? Compassionate, active listening is the goal, so that you're letting go of whatever your story is, and you're really allowing the person to express to you how things are for them. And you know how it is for you inside your own head, inside your own body, inside your own experience. No one can know what that is unless you share it. People can make assumptions and projections, and believe me, they will, about you and how you are and what's happening with you and how you feel. But that doesn't mean they're getting it right. So it's so important, and this is why I really wanted to cover this topic, to understand that a lot of the time as we're moving through the world, we're making snap decisions about what we're seeing, right? The information is coming at us, and our minds are processing all the time. And the mind loves to categorize. It wants to understand things, and it wants to understand them quickly. So, for example, if you meet someone new, you're trying to figure out, who is this person? Do I like them? Do I not like them? Do we think in a similar way? Do we not think in a similar way? If somebody likes X, then they probably like Y and Z too. This person is cool or not cool. Like, we're always putting people in a box, and unless you work on it, unless you say to yourself, wait a second, like, that whole thing of, don't judge a book by its cover. Like, just try not to make these snap decisions about who people are, because you're probably going to get it wrong a large majority of the time. And people do it online all the time too. And I was talking about that as well this week. One of my favorite writers, Lauren Huff, shared a post that was basically like, it was not her post, it was someone else's post that she shared about Americans not having passports and not traveling internationally. This large percentage of Americans, compared to other countries, large percentage of American citizens don't have passports and don't travel internationally. And it is because Americans are insular and self-absorbed. And in that original post, so many people were responding, Americans, saying, that's not it. We can't afford it. Like, people here right now are struggling, and we don't have universal health care. We don't have enough paid time off. We've got like 10 days, and a lot of people are using their paid time off for sick days for their kids because there isn't enough childcare, and groceries are like, everything is really expensive right now. And it's not a lack of wanting to travel, it's a lack of means. Even being able to take off a week and go somewhere and buy plane tickets, and and there were a large number of people in this thread responding from other countries, Canada and Australia. And hey, please believe me, I think most Canadians and Australians are amazing, wonderful, beautiful people. Just happen to be in this particular thread. A lot of people who don't live in this country saying, nope, that's not that. It's because you're insular and self-absorbed. So, that's just one example. This happens all day, every day. Somebody says something, and then 20 people pile on and say, no, it's not that, it's this. Well, I'm just going to say, if you don't live in a country, probably just listen to the people who live in the country. There were people saying things like, well, then you should just lobby your government for more time off so that it's more like other countries in the world. Lobby our government? Okay. Clearly you're not living here right now. Like, clearly, because we've been lobbying our government about a lot of things, like maybe not having our children, shot at school. Like, that's just one example. So, like, believe me, if it was that easy, we would have done it. So there's just like a lot of that. Again, there's a story there, and people are more attached to the story than they are to any kind of feedback, about like any sort of pushback or like, wait, no, it's not. And there's just the opportunity for nuanced conversation in all areas of life right now. It's just like dwindled down to almost nothing. Certainly I don't see it happening online. People just scream at each other on the internet. And I think most of us are emotionally fatigued. We're exhausted because everything is controversial. You just post something that you think is the most just like obvious, like nothing, you didn't even mean anything, you're just sort of like saying something, and you'll be attacked somehow or another. It's like, you say something about, oh, like all dogs should have a good life, and somebody will come like, I can't believe you don't care about cats. It's like, it's just it's madness. And so, but it's part of the same animal that I'm talking about here, which is storytelling. You might find yourself in the unenviable position of being the villain in somebody else's story. Sometimes people, they have to create a narrative that they can live with so they can go to sleep at night. And sometimes that narrative is, you are the problem, you're the villain, you're the reason everything is wrong in their life. And that's how they're getting through. There's not much that you can do if somebody wants to create a narrative about you. It's like, all you can really do is know who you are and do your best to keep showing up in the world as yourself, doing the best that you can. You're not going to get everything right all the time. And just and allowing that to be enough. I know who I am, and I know what I'm trying to do, and I know how I feel, and I know what I'm trying to share, and I know what I'm doing behind the scenes, and like, that's it. Like, I just need to be able to look myself in the eye at the end of the day. That's really it. If you can, I know that it's very painful, especially if we're talking about somebody in your life that is either close to you or that is in proximity to you because of a shared history. It's sometimes not so easy, especially if there are children involved. Sometimes you're dealing with that situation where you have shared children with someone and they've decided you're the villain in the situation. I'm very lucky not to be in that position, but I know a lot of people who are in that position, and it's very painful to have somebody that you knew for a very long time, that you were close to for a very long time, that you had children with, have this narrative about you that is so not it, but there is no point in trying to change somebody's mind if they're that attached. And a lot of people are extremely attached to a narrative because they can't, if they let go of that, everything falls apart. And maybe they have to look at their own choices and actions and things that they've done or said that are really terribly painful to face. So it's easier to just have a villain and they can be the victim. It's a common thing. When we're talking about someone, hopefully if you're trying to work on yourself, it's a really good idea to look at your stories on a pretty regular basis and figure out whether they're productive, are they serving you? Are they true? Were they maybe true 10 years ago, but they're not true now? But more than anything, are they helping you or are they hurting you? And are they weighing you down? Are you carrying around a lot of old stories that are heavy and painful and sort of keeping them alive? And anything that we feed is going to grow and strengthen. So if we keep feeding a story about a situation, about ourselves, about someone else, we're keeping it alive. Even if whatever, the problem began decades ago, you can keep this stuff alive forever if you want to, and no one can stop you. But that's a lot of energy that you're feeding to something old. And my feeling is always I want to be feeding my energy to things that are happening right here, right now. And, planting the seeds today for whatever it is I'm trying to grow tomorrow. I don't want to be stuck 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I don't want to be enraged about things that happened when, it's a lot of things happened in my childhood. Yeah, they had a huge impact on me, and I write about it all the time and I talk about it a lot because I think that's everyone. I think all the stuff that happens in childhood is so useful to look at because it'll really give you a deep understanding of where you're still hurting and where those kind of childhood wounds are still showing up in your life. And then what to address and where you could use the work, where you could use a little extra compassion, attention, energy toward further healing and further understanding yourself. Even just acknowledging that there's some pain somewhere is such a relief to the system, right? Even just knowing, understanding oh, you know what, there's still a part of me in here that comes to life once in a while that's terrified of being abandoned. There's that 4-year-old kid in me who is still afraid everyone could just disappear on a dime. And that little kid in me rises to the surface sometimes and is really, really scared. So I know that about myself. And so I know, okay, all right, that's all right. There she is. I'm just going to give her a little time and attention because she's not okay right now. I just need to give her a little reassurance, and then she'll go back to finger painting, whatever's happening, Knowing yourself it's just really helpful, right? So that you can be accountable. And that's always what I'm hoping for, is that I'm doing whatever work I need to do on myself so that the world inside of me, this whole landscape in here, is as peaceful as it can be. It's as loving as it can be. It's patient, compassionate. And then that way, that's the stuff that I'm filled with, and that's what I have then to offer, right? And that's kind of what I'm spreading, hopefully. That's the ideal. It doesn't mean I get it right all the time, every day, every minute. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that's the goal, right? Is to make sure there's some time in each day for me to just tune in. And sometimes it's multiple times a day. It doesn't have to be a long amount of time, by the way. I know we're all super busy, but there's some amount of time in my day carved out to figure out how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, what my inner environment is like. Because we're so busy that if you don't carve out these moments and you don't make this a part of your habitual life, you can go through the whole day and never even stop to think about how you're feeling. It's very easy to do. You can be so caught up in the to-do list and where you're going and what other people need, and, the work that you're doing, and, oh yeah, got to throw in laundry, and like all the different things that you could go through a whole day and not once just kind of like, wait a second, let me just pause for a second and see how I am. Am I okay? Are my shoulders up around my ears right now? Like, how's my breathing? Am it's just like that shallow chest breathing, or am I actually getting some nice deep breathing happening here? Like, I don't know, is my jaw clenched or my eyebrows furrowed? How am I? How's my emotional body? Like, how am I doing right now? And the more you're able to just work that in, so that it's not, you don't even have to think about it. It's just part of a habitual thing that you're doing, that check-in, the more you're going to be able to show up in the world in a meaningful way, right? In a loving way, in a way that feels good to you. When we don't know how we feel or what's happening with us, and we're just spinning and like flying through the day because that's, we've got a million things to do, who knows what's going to happen when you get in your car and get on the road. Like, are you going to be letting people merge? Are you, like, if you haven't checked in, it's hard to know what might happen and what frustration might rise to the surface, or resentment, or, confusion. So that's why I'm always such a proponent of like, find the tools that work for you. It can be as simple as like 4-7-8 breathing while you're driving, or every time you come to a stop sign, taking a deep breath, or a red light. My friend Beth, who is a therapist, that's what she does. Every time she comes to a red light, so years and years and years ago, I was volunteering in my daughter's kindergarten class, and this little girl, we were sitting at a table, and these kids are like 5, and a siren went by, and she bowed her little head and closed her eyes and clasped her hands together and didn't say anything to anyone, but I just happened to see, and she made, when she opened her eyes, she looked at me and she said, "I'm just hoping that everyone is okay." I do that now. It was like such a little Buddha, this little kid at 5 has it all figured out. It's just, she's got it already, and all she has to do is keep it, and she's good. That's really the idea. And the stories that we are telling ourselves sometimes are, just, it's so good to look at them and to throw a lot more compassion and empathy into the mix, both for ourselves and other people. And to, if you do have someone in your life who is clinging to a narrative about you that really you're like, this is not me, like that's just not accurate, I'm not this villainous creature that, just doesn't, like, this is not who I am. To also understand, if someone needs to do that and they need to stay enraged for years and years, they're in pain. They're in pain. They are not okay. And so if, as painful as it might be for you to have to deal with that, to whatever degree you have to deal with it, and we could talk about that, like, how can you create boundaries and try to like not, there's a thing in meditation where you eventually, when you learn how to focus on sensation in your body, it gives you, and it's also in yoga, when your focal points, right? When you train yourself, like, okay, when I'm in this pose, this is my point of focus, you're training your mind to choose one thought over another. And that sometimes is like the best way to give yourself some time back. If you find like I'm focusing on this other person's narrative about who I am, that's not a good use of my time and energy. I'm going to pick up my mind and focus on, something else that speaks to who I actually am and what actually matters to me. And I'm not going to get caught up. I'm not going to let someone else tell me who I am. I know who I am. That alone can be incredibly helpful. Checking in again on your own stories, just kind of seeing like, do I have a story about myself that isn't helpful? Like that idea I said at the very beginning of the talk about no one likes me. That's a story, or everyone else gets the breaks. I've known a few people that have that. It's not helpful, and it's not going to serve you to walk through the world like, oh, everyone else gets the break. It's kind of like the Eeyore mentality. It's not going to help you, and so those are stories that are really useful to look at. It will affect the way that you're walking into the world. And if you are walking around thinking no one likes me or other people get the breaks, you're going to kind of perpetuate, we're energetic creatures, right? We emit energy, we absorb energy. So if you're walking out the door with this like, oh, no one likes me, like you're probably not putting out the, hi, like, nice to meet you. Like you're not putting that out, so you're not going to get that back. You're probably going to get people who don't really come close because you're putting out the vibes there, the signals that they don't know what they're looking at exactly. They just know that it's not welcoming and friendly and open. So that's all that, again, people are quick to figure out how they feel about things. And so the energy that we're emitting as we're moving around, it matters, and the stories impact the energy. They really do. So if you're telling yourself a sad story, and it's not that they're not, some of the sad stories we're telling ourselves are true stories. It's not like all the stories are wrong. Some of the stories they're true and they're heartbreaking and they're tough to live with, but maybe they're not the best. If they're way in the past, maybe it's not the best use of your energy. It may be better to pick your mind up and tell yourself a better story for today and for right now. And so I hope that my little Ted, Fred, and Ned story time here has been helpful to you. Just give you an opportunity to think about, do I have stories about people in my life? Do I have stories about things that have happened, or myself, or why things are the way they are, why I am the way I am, why other people, how quickly am I trying to categorize people as I'm going through the day, or if I'm online, am I always trying to quickly put people into the I like this or I don't like this category? And can I maybe slow that down a little bit? If I'm in an interaction with someone and I have a story, could I maybe just for a few minutes release my grip on the story and just have an open conversation, whether it's in person, which is always ideal, or online with a stranger even, maybe I shouldn't argue with someone who lives in a country that I don't live in about what it's like to live in that country. Maybe that's not, the best use of my time. And maybe if I just listened, I would learn something about what it's like for someone else. And then maybe they would do that same thing for me. There's just too much kind of snap judgment and clinging to an opinion and not enough kindness, nuanced conversation, compassionate, active listening. We need more of that. So I'm hopeful that at the end of this talk, maybe you can be, spreading that kind of vibe, that kind of energy. And believe me, it's ongoing work. I check my own stories regularly. It's kind of like checking your bookshelf. Sometimes you want to cull through the books that you have. Maybe you've got some really old stuff that you would like to donate. Same, just check the stories in your mind and see if there's anything that maybe it's time to clear out and free up some space for some newer, different stories. And thank you so much for joining me for this conversation and for this story time. And I'll see you soon.